Hi, my name is Griffin Bray, and this is my final project for Adult Learning with Dr. Gail Luera in the winter 2020 semester. So my final project is an interpretive hike and the factors that have shaped Sleeping Bear Dunes into what it is. Now, an interpretive hike is pretty much an experiential learning experience. I take people out into nature, they get an experience, and I talk a little bit trying to translate the language of nature into something that they understand well. A lot of it is based on experiential learning and the constructivist theory. So this theory says that people learn to make sense of their experiences in life. As such, they also bring their experiences to the table when they're learning, and this will color how they see things or what they understand and think about it. This means that you need to take those experiences into consideration. Now, because this is experiential learning, we can also judge how effective it's going to be using Kolb's cycle of experiential learning. This cycle has 4 steps: concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. The concrete experience in this case would be the hike. Ideally, this would be an in-person hike, and the participants could experience this. They walk through the forest, they feel the wind, feel what it's like to be in that environment. There's also, after the experience, the reflective observation period. Now, in the actual hike, there would be questions. I like to ask a lot of questions and get the participants actively engaged, actively applying their knowledge, and this would allow them to complete that reflective observation, to think about how all of this knowledge fits in with their current ideas. After that reflective observation, there is the abstract conceptualization portion, which is where they take what they've learned and incorporate it into their views on this topic and into their views in general. So, on the hike, this would be done through some quiet reflection time while we're walking from stop to stop. There'd also be a lot of deeper questioning, trying to get them to think about how all of this fits in with their worldview and into the world in general. Now finally, there is active experimentation, which is where they take the knowledge and apply it. Some of the active experimentation for a hike like this might be going to another hike led by me or someone else, or visiting Sleeping Bear Dunes, especially if this is something that you're watching in quarantine and have never been to the dunes before. So we may not be able to actively measure that, but if they come back and apply their knowledge, maybe take a walk and think about how all of this has happened, then we've accomplished that too. In addition to the Kolb cycle and constructivist theory, we can also apply the principles of andragogy to this audience. Now, they will not meet all of these 6 assumptions, but they do meet 4 pretty well. First, they are self-directed. They choose to be there. No one's telling them what they need to learn. They decided they wanted to be here because they want to be here. They also bring their experiences, like we talked about with the constructivist theory. These past experiences color what they're learning and how they're learning it. Again, they're internally motivated. No one is saying you get a raise if you go to this program, most likely. But they're here because they want to learn. And finally, adults normally want to know why they're learning something. They're not just happy with knowing, oh, this is this. They're more concerned with, why is this important to me? And it's my job as the interpreter to make that come through in the program. Explain why it's important to know this, how this has shaped this area or impacted your life. There are a couple of things that you want to address and be aware of with a program like this. First, you want to make it inclusive. Now, we learned a little bit about how age affects people, how it impacts their cognitive abilities to some extent. You want to make sure that you're aware of that, because you might get a bunch of seniors and a bunch of 20-somethings. So you want to make sure that you're talking loudly enough that everyone can hear and understand you. And finally, you want to make it stick. You want to have an emotional and an intellectual connection. You want to know your audience. You want to be able to use their experiences, their ideas, to make this more relevant to them. Because the more relevant it is, the better it sticks and the more positive of an experience. So in addition to that knowledge, you want to make sure that you're providing a good, relevant experience. So all of these tie together to create a good hike. Now, the hike you're about to see is about 10 minutes. It would realistically be about an hour and a half to 2 hours, because it's a several-mile hike, and there'd be an audience of whoever wants to come. There'd be a lot more questions, but hopefully you enjoy this hike and learn some things and maybe visit the dunes. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming out. My name is Griffin Bray, and I am a rambling naturalist. As a rambling naturalist, I get to go from place to place across the state of Michigan and take people out into this beautiful natural world that we have here, and hopefully help them learn a few things. In my time as a rambling naturalist, I've worked in places as varied as Detroit to Sleeping Bear Dunes, where we are today. I worked here over the winter and took people out and let them explore the beauty of winter at Sleeping Bear Dunes. Sleeping Bear Dunes is a national park site, one of 419 countrywide and one of 6 in the state of Michigan. And a lot of people kind of think that it's not a great place to go in the winter because it's in northern Michigan, there's snow, it's cold, there's not going to be much to see, but there's actually quite a lot more than most people think. So right now it's the tail end of March, and winter's just barely hanging on, but we can have a nice walk and learn a little bit more about the area. Today we're going to be walking back in time and examining the different things that have helped make Sleeping Bear Dunes what it is. Because even though Sleeping Bear Dunes is a protected area today, it is still a dynamic ecosystem that has been shaped through a variety of different forces that we'll be seeing on our walk. And made it to our first stop. So, going back in time, the most recent influence on Sleeping Bear Dunes has been people. Since the Native Americans, the Anishinaabe people, settled here about 1,500 years ago, we have been having a pretty big impact on the land. Most notably, a lot of the land here was logged during the later part of the 1800s and early 1900s. Before that, this whole area around us would have been old growth, hardwood, and pine forests. We might see some remnants of that a little bit later, but everything around us would have been these enormous trees. Lumbermen saw this and realized it would be perfect for building. So a lot of these trees were logged off and used to build cities and towns all across the country. When the lumber industry started to wane a little bit into the 20th century, that opened up opportunities for entrepreneurs to come in and start tourism. So today, Sleeping Bear Dunes is a tourist hotspot. It wasn't always that way. But starting in the late 1960s, an entrepreneur named Pierce Stocking created the first Sleeping Bear Dunes park. It was a 14-mile road loop that took people through the woods, the second growth forests, and along the dunes. And this covered bridge is a remnant of that. So the path we've been walking today is just a 7-mile section of what used to be that trail. And this bridge covers a small gully, but Pierce Stocking knew that people want to come take pictures, and he would provide them with the scenic views that they like. Since then, Sleeping Bear Dunes has become a national lakeshore since 1970, and it has also been named the most beautiful place in America by Good Morning America, which has encouraged millions of tourists to come out every year and experience the beauty of the dunes. So we are still having an impact on here, a lot less now that we're a protected national lakeshore, but we still influence the way that the park is set up and the way that things are living here. Now, as we continue on our walk, we're going to head a little bit further back in time and look at another force that has helped make the dunes what they are today. So if everyone can look around here, maybe start thinking about what that force might be. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we get to our next stop. All right, we made it to the second stop. Now, while we were walking from our first stop, I had asked you all to think about what the second force that is shaping our dunes is. Anyone have any guesses? Yeah, the biotic community, the plants and animals that live here. It may seem a bit strange to think that the forest here is in some way shaping the dunes, but it actually has a large part to play. Going back before the people, but after the sand, we had plants starting to move in, grasses and shrubs, and they eventually stabilized the dunes. They stopped all that sand from moving and kept it in one spot. Because they did that, we have a forest now. with these many different trees. Everything from hemlocks and birches to white pine, red pine, maple, ash, basswood, just a whole plethora of trees, and even more understory shrubs and grasses and wildflowers. All of these plants in turn help to support a ton of animals. If you were listening while we were walking, you may have heard some of these songs from a handful of the 150 bird species that rely on the plants in our park. If you were looking at the snow and ice on the ground, you may have noticed some tracks from some of the animals in our park as well. Things like deer or coyote or skunks. Now, part of the great thing about coming out in winter is we get to see more of this. In the summer, you don't get these views of all of the different trees in the forest because you have that wall of leaves. You don't get to see all of the tracks and the animals that we would normally overlook because we don't have the snow and ice on the ground to tell us. So, coming out in the winter gives us a really good picture of the different animals and plants that help make the Sleeping Bear Dunes ecosystem what it is today. So we've talked about the people and the impact they've had. We've talked about the plants and animals. And there's one more incredibly important factor that helps make Sleeping Bear Dunes what it is today and what it has been for thousands of years. All right, we made it to our third stop. So we are actually standing on the dunes right now. Lake Michigan is just off to your left, my right, and right behind me, that large dark mound is the Sleeping Bear, the most famous dune we have here. And off in the distance in Lake Michigan are her two cubs, the Manitou Islands. When the Anishinaabe people first came here, they created the legend of the Sleeping Bear, where she swam all the way across our big lake with her two cubs, who unfortunately drowned. And there she sits to this day, waiting for them to come ashore. Going from a more scientific standpoint, both the islands and the dune, and even the lake itself, are evidence of our third and most ancient force that shaped these areas. Does anyone have any guesses? Yeah, the geology. So, thousands of years ago, all of this area, from Canada down through Ohio and a little bit past, was covered in miles of ice, covered underneath glaciers. These glaciers turned river channels into the 5 Great Lakes that we know today, and ground up tons and tons and tons of rocks. Some of these rocks, the glaciers dropped in large hills called moraines. We're standing on one of those hills right now. And the rest of that, they turned into sand and dirt. Over time, that sand blew a lot of it up onto the moraines here and created the dunes. Without that sand, without those glaciers, we wouldn't have dunes, period, and we wouldn't have a park. Now, I've been talking a lot about these three forces: geology, biology, and people. I've also been talking about them like they're separate entities, when in fact, we need all three to come together to create these dunes today. The geology, the glaciers, are responsible for creating the actual landforms, moving the sand, all of that. And then over time, vegetation movement, like on the Sleeping Bear. That stabilizes the dunes and lets it go through that process, by which it creates that forest that we were walking through earlier. After that, we came in and realized the potential of the area for logging and for tourism. This combination of geology, biology, and people has created this national park that you are the latest people to explore and enjoy. So thank you all for coming out and enjoying this somewhat gray day. I hope you all had fun and hopefully learned some things too. And as we continue to go on our way, or as you go on your own way and enjoy the rest of your weekend, let's all just think about how amazing it is that all of these forces combined to create this one spot that we've all been able to experience today.